Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 2. And just a little catch up on what happened in the first issue. We met the man who would become Swamp Thing, Alec Holland. He is a scientist, and him and his wife were hired by the government to work on a secret biorestorative formula. And unfortunately, even though the government put them in a secret lab where they thought they would be safe, they did not put very much security, and bad guys were able to find them. And those bad guys are called the Conclave. They are some kind of secret organization. We don't know too much about them yet, but we do know that there's like a head guy that gives orders to a bunch of goons, and those goons are the ones who ended up planting a bomb in Alec Holland's laboratory, which ended up blowing up and spilling the biorestorative formula on his body, and then he ran out into the swamp in order to put the fire out, and that's where he died. Then something happened because the biorestorative formula mixed with the swamp water in Alec's body, and thus was born the Swamp Thing. Alec Holland came back as a hulking green mass of plant life. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to come back in time to save his wife, who was killed by the same guys who killed him. So now that he's got this big hulking body, he found the men at his laboratory and began fighting them. And of course, they are no match for his new big hulking swamp body. So he takes them out. It does look like he kills them in the issue, but I believe later on they say, oh, he just knocked him out. You know, because it's the 70s and they can't really kill people then. But where we left off, Swamp Thing was kind of sad, of course, because his wife died and he doesn't know what happened to his body and he's still not exactly sure what's going on. So the main characters that were left were Swamp Thing, the government agent that was supposed to be protecting them, Matt Cable, and a dog that Alec and Linda found in the swamp. And even though the dog is nice and everything, it actually has a radio beacon or receiver that allows the Conclave, the evil guys, to hear everything that's going on with originally Alec Holland and his wife, but now Swamp Thing and Matt Cable. All right, so first things first, with issue 2, we got the cover here. We see that Swamp Thing is fighting a couple of, let's call them homunculi. They're basically a couple of Frankensteins. They have extra heads and arms sewn onto them, though. And they are fighting Swamp Thing out on a wooden beam that is stretching from a window in a castle. And it looks like Swamp Thing's having kind of a hard time with this because it looks like he's about to slip off. And then in the window of the castle, right in front of this beam, is a man dressed in a red cloak who looks very evil and sinister. And we see that this is written by Len Wein with art by Bernie Wrightson. And as we turn to the first page, we see the name of this issue is The Man Who Wanted Forever. And we start off kind of close to where the last issue ended. We see Swamp Thing and his dog friend sitting in the shadows of the swamp, looking at Matt Cable and a couple of EMTs load up the body of evil Mr. Ferret, who's the Conclave goon that ended up planting the bomb that killed Alan and then shot Linda, Alec's wife, dead. And as Swamp Thing watches this, his face looks kind of stern, but the funny thing is the little dog with him has an angry face as it looks on Ferret being helped by the EMTs. And as Swamp Thing and the dog watch from the shadows, we get some narration that says, "Rain, 'tis said, can wash away the past, cover over memories with a bittersweet glistening haze. For the grotesque figure who crouches in the shadows, watching grimly as two broken bodies are silently carried away, the sudden storm has ended far too soon. For the memories linger and they burn. Lord, how they burn." Then we get a quick recap where we see Swamp Thing is remembering everything that happened in the last issue. So we're seeing flashes of Alec and Linda Holland being confronted by Ferret and his men, then the explosion, then Swamp Thing raising from the water, him finding his wife Linda dead, and him fighting with Mr. Ferret. And the narration continues over these panels saying, "But no mere skyborn moisture can quench the flaming images that fill Swamp Thing's mind. Images of angry confrontation several days earlier, when monster had been man. Images of pain, as a fearsome explosion hurled Alec Holland's smoldering body deep into the surrounding swamp, and the man called Ferret exacted his measure of vengeance. Images of resurrection, as a great twisted form rose from the grasping mire and tasted life once more. But with renewed life came the grisly shadow of death, and the still silent figure of Dr. Linda Holland, Alec's associate and his wife. Then finally images of a debt repaid, as the hideous thing that was once a man of science balanced fate's cold scales." So Swamp Thing begins to look away as He sees the EMTs close up their doors after putting Ferret inside. And I'm not sure if Swamp Thing actually did kill Ferret and his men, but Swamp Thing seems to think that he did, because as he pets his dog and they're about to walk back into the swamp, he thinks, "It's over, little one. Ferret and Bruno will never hurt anyone again. Their hell is ended, while mine is just beginning. Come, little one. There is nothing left for us here. Nothing left for me anywhere. Only silence. Cold, unending silence." Then as Swamp Thing is walking back into the plant life of the swamp, he is attacked suddenly by a bunch of humanoid-ish monsters. And I say humanoid because it looks like all these different types of bodies were put together by someone who had a bunch of cadavers and they didn't like the way the human body was designed, so they decided to kind of make their own designs. So even though they have human body parts, they definitely don't look human. I will describe some of the more interesting ones. There's just a disembodied head that is attached to a hand, and it walks around on that hand. There's one that has two heads, but the heads are on opposite sides of the torso, like where its legs would be, and it doesn't have legs, so it walks around on its hands. We see one hanging from a tree by a worm-like lower half of its body. And then we see one in the background, which looks like whoever made these people just sewed a bunch of arms and legs into one body to see what would happen. And there are many more, but these are the ones that stuck out to me. And so as they attack him, the narration says, "Then suddenly the silence has hands, and talons clutching tendrils, slick-scaled claws. It writhes in countless unhuman shapes that drop from the towering treetops like demonic rain, covering the massive man monster with a blanket of synthetic flesh." And we see the head on the hand seems to be the leader of these men, and he's yelling to them, "Swiftly, my unmen, capture him swiftly! The master will not tolerate your failure!" And if you remember at the very end of the last issue on the last page, there was a mirror that was surrounded by some kind of monsters and an evil hand saying, go get Swamp Thing. And the creatures that were around that giant mirror are the same ones that are attacking Swamp Thing right now. So as Swamp Thing is fighting them off, he's thinking to himself, "Don't know what these things are or what they want. I don't care to find out. I just want them to leave me alone." And Swamp Thing is fighting 8 of these things at once, and he's holding his own. They're having a hard time with him. So the monster that is a head on a hand, who seems to be the leader, and his name is Cranius, he calls out to something in the trees saying, "He discards them like so much chaff, but there is still one left to call. Ophidian, your brothers have need of you." And we see perched on a tree above is a salamander-like monster, except it has 5 pairs of legs on its body. And it also has light purple skin with really dark purple eyes. So Ophidian answers and says to Cranius, "Yes, Cranius, Ophidian comes." So Ophidian drops down on Swamp Thing and wraps around his body and begins to stare into Swamp Thing's eyes. And it says out loud to Swamp Thing, look at me. Gaze into Ophidian's eyes." And Swamp Thing is trying to pull Ophidian off, and even though he's moving Ophidian's body, Ophidian's gaze does not break, and he maintains eye contact with Swamp Thing. And Swamp Thing is thinking in his head, "My head, pounding, got to tear him loose, turn those eyes away." But it seems no use, because Ophidian will not budge, and he continues talking to Swamp Thing saying, "That's right, struggle, tire yourself, so you will sleep." And even though Swamp Thing's still fighting, he's thinking in his head, "That stare burning into my head must do something to stop it before I don't remember anymore. Don't understand. What am I doing here? Why do I feel so strange?" And then Swamp Thing's body crashes down face first onto the ground because he has been hypnotized to go to sleep. And now that Swamp Thing is down, Cranius yells to Ophidian, "You have done well. He was a most formidable foe indeed. Well, you all know your tasks. Everyone get to work." Then we cut to Matt Cable, who is still talking to the EMTs, and then he turns his head because he hears something in the swamp, and he says, "Hey, did you hear that?" And one of the EMTs answers, "Hear what, Lieutenant Cable? All I hear around this bog is bullfrogs." And then Cable says, "No, nothing living. More like an engine, a boat maybe." And then both of them glance up at the sky because it seems like the sound is coming from there now. And the guy says, "Yeah, I hear it now, but that ain't no boat. It sounds more like an airplane." And then out of the swamp, we see burst forth a giant airplane, the kind that land on water, of course, because they're landing in the swamp. And it's just your standard propeller type airplane, not with jets. But the weird thing is, hanging underneath it, we see Swamp Thing's body has been chained to a wooden X-cross that is hanging from the bottom of the plane. So instead of putting him inside, the unmen decided to hang him on the outside. And when the EMT sees this, he says, My God, Cable, there's something chained to the undercarriage of that job. Something human." And Cable says, "Whatever that is, Mike, it's not human. That's the monster that clobbered me and killed those two." And if you don't remember from the last issue, at the end of it, Matt Cable thought that Swamp Thing was the one who had killed Alec and Linda. So he ended up pledging revenge and saying he was going to get that monster. So as he sees Swamp Thing's body hanging, it seems like he's kind of mad. But then he's distracted by this feeling as he hears a dog barking next to him. And he looks over and he sees Swamp Thing's dog that has been left here. Luckily, the unmen didn't do anything to him. And he says, "What? Linda's mutt? At least that thing didn't get you." And the EMT, who's still looking at the plane, says, "Man, she's already out of range, heading due east like her tail were on fire." And as Matt Cable picks up the dog, he watches the plane disappear and he says, "Well, stop wondering and find out. Somehow, that creature is responsible for the deaths of several people, and I'm not going to rest until I find it and finish it off." Then we cut to the plane a little bit further in its journey, and as it flies, we get some narration that says, "Morning dwindles into noon. The great black craft cuts the sky like a twin-engined scythe. Due east. An ink-dark shadow slips across the rippling Atlantic, the Iberian Peninsula, the gleaming Mediterranean, and the day grows older still until the shadow settles softly upon an icy Balkan lake." So the plane has landed in an Eastern European country. They haven't specified which one, but the unmen have landed the airplane in a lake, and all of them are in a boat except for the ones that are paddling Swamp Thing, because Swamp Thing is on the X-cross of wood, so he is floating, but he is still passed out. And the unmen that's on top of him is paddling on both sides of the X because it has enough arms and heads to do that. And Cranius and the other unmen are behind it, and Cranius is yelling, "Have a care, fool. The master wants no harm to befall the giant one. He has something special planned for this specimen." So they float Swamp Thing on the lake and through a cavern that looks like it's underground. And then from there, they take Swamp Thing out of the water and put his X-cross on a wooden cart and begin trekking him through the caverns. And the narration says, "The Swamp Thing slumbers on oblivious as the small ship sweeps into the darkness. The angry mountains maw. He does not feel himself lifted from the water by unhuman hands, then trusts like some sad martyr into a creaking wooden cart. He is not bothered by the persistent jounce and clatter, as he is dragged down time-worn tunnels that twist through the mountain's breast." And then the unmen make it through the tunnels of the mountain, and as they exit, we see a giant castle in the distance, and the narration continues. "And he does not see the castle reaching grimly for the sky. Lofty spires clawing at the clouds like talons tearing gossamer. Dim-lit windows peering down like rheumy yellow eyes. All this is beyond the man-monster's notice as he sleeps his dreamless sleep." And as the unmen see the castle, one of them yells out, "Pull, pull, my brothers! We're almost home!" So they finally make it to the castle, and as they're entering the gates, Swamp Thing finally wakes up, and it seems like he's got a grasp of what's going on because as he awakens, he immediately pulls, and he ends up snapping the X-cross in half. And immediately the unmen jump on him, and he's thinking, "Chained. They had me chained. The scenery is different, but the situation is the same." So he begins beating the crap out of all of them again, and as he does, there just keeps being more and more of these unmen, because now they're at home. They're in their castle, and I think there's more of them just around. So Swamp Thing is beating them up. He's thinking, "How many of them are there? For each one that falls, 2 others take its place. Must be a way out of here, but where?" So Swamp Thing is actually fighting them all over the castle. He's even fighting them upstairs, which I've never seen before. Like he's punching down on them, but there's so many that are moving forward up the stairs, they're pushing him up as well. So as he looks for a place to make his escape, he sees at the top of the stairs and he thinks, "That window may be my only hope. Can't keep fighting these things forever. So he moves to the window, and as he climbs through it, he is about to step out onto a wooden beam, and he thinks, have to get away, collect my thoughts, discover where I am before, and then he yells out, no! And he yells this out because he has trapped himself. There is nowhere for him to go now except further out on this wooden beam that is going to end. And the unmen, they follow him out the window and onto that wooden beam. And he thinks to himself, really did it this time. No place left for me to turn. But I'll take these goblins with me when I go. And the narration says, they gibber as they come, these strange synthetic beings, and they spill over the misshapen man monster like a writhing tide, grasping, clutching, until a voice like fractured crystal rings through the cool, crisp air. Then we hear someone say, now, my pets, you shouldn't be so rough with your new playmate. And Swamp Thing turns when he hears his voice and thinks, who? And when he turns, he sees an old man standing in the window, and the old man says to him, I can read the question in your eyes, dear boy. My name is Arcane. Really, my young friend, you needn't look so defensive. I assure you my pets are quite harmless. Please, take my hand. Let me help you inside. And the old man reaches out his hand, and Swamp Thing, having no other options, takes it. And once Swamp Thing is in the castle, Arcane and him begin to walk, and the narration says, moments echo along cobbled corridors, strange, unfamiliar. The soft tread of feet gone withered with age, the muck-wet shuffle of legs no longer human. And Arcane is saying to Swamp Thing, forgive my manner of summoning you, my friend, but I could not chance you refusing my invitation. You see, I have a proposition to make you, a most unusual proposition indeed. I am old, my boy, frightfully old, but I have learned many things in my time upon this earth, occult enchantments, supernatural lore. I know the secret of immortality, for example, but it is a secret I dare not put to use while I still inhabit this bent and wizened form. And as Arcane is walking and talking with Swamp Thing, they end up in front of a locked wooden door, and Arcane pulls out a key and says, using my gathered knowledge, I sought to build myself a new, more enduring form, synthetically. My unmen are the result of my first experimentations, crude but totally dedicated to me. Then he unlocks the door with that key, and as Swamp Thing and him enter the room, we see a bunch more humanoid creatures, but these ones look very, very sad and weak, and it seems like these are the failed unmen experiments. And Arcane continues, I'm afraid I did not fare as well with my later creations. The bodies, you will notice, are more human in form, but the minds are nearly useless. I keep the poor artificial things contained down here to prevent them doing any accidental harm. Then he takes Swamp Thing to another room, and this is the room with the giant mirror that allowed him to see Swamp Thing in the last issue. And Arcane continues, I'd almost given up hope of attaining the necessary body when I chanced to spy you in this ancient mystic mirror. I know all about you, the experiments, the explosion, the murder of your wife, and there's something I can do to help you. Would you like to be human once again, Dr. Alec Holland? And this whole time, Swamp Thing hasn't said anything. And I think I had mentioned this before, but in this first volume of Swamp Thing, it's very rare that he actually talks out loud. Most of the time, he's just thinking in his head. So as Anton says, would you like to be human again, Doctor? Swamp Thing just has a super sad look on his face, but we don't get any of his inner thoughts. Then Swamp Thing goes over to a window and he begins to look out of it, and he actually grabs the curtains as he thinks and looks out the window, and it seems like he's going through some kind of turmoil. But once again, we don't get any of those inner thoughts. But Arcane can probably sense this, so he goes over and says, believe me, my friend, I am most earnest. I have the ability to rid you of this monstrous form permanently. It's a simple process, actually, but I must have your complete cooperation. Well, Dr. Holland, what do you say? Have we a deal? And then Swamp Thing doesn't respond. He just keeps looking out the window, and it seems like this kind of angers Arcane because he says, Dr. Holland, what's wrong with you, man? Don't you want to be human? Don't you care? And then Swamp Thing turns suddenly and frightens Arcane, and he looks kind of mad, but then that anger turns into despair, and he cries out, I care. And with that, it seems that Swamp Thing does agree, because the next scene we see is Swamp Thing in Arcane's laboratory. And this is literally like Frankenstein's lab. There's brains and stuff all over the place in jars. There's a large table that Swamp Thing is laying down on. And Arcane is saying to him, "Before we can proceed, Dr. Holland, we must know more about your, condition, vital statistics and such. You understand." Then he begins taking measurements of Swamp Thing, saying, height 89 inches, weight 547 pounds, apparently all muscle. We'd best check your respiration and blood pressure next. And then the next panel is Swamp Thing sitting, and Arcane is putting a blood pressure coupling on Swamp Thing's arm. And as Arcane reads the dial, he says, "Why, you have no blood pressure, and your respiration, like that of a plant. You breathe in carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen." And then we get a panel of Swamp Thing getting an x-ray from Arcane. And unlike most x-ray machines where you have to take a picture and then those are developed, the machine Arcane has is just a big glass panel that is hanging over Swamp Thing's chest, and Arcane is looking directly down at it, seeing Swamp Thing's skeleton. And Arcane continues, "Your body, it seems equally plant-like. There are several bullets lodged inside you, in places that would be fatal to anyone else. Remarkable, my boy. I must investigate further." And then it looks like he has Swamp Thing's hand under a microscope, and he's saying, "Astonishing. Those roots covering your body are alive. They move of their own accord." And then Anton looks at Swamp Thing and he says, "Yes, Dr. Holland, I would say your body is exactly what I've been looking for." Then we come back to the swamp in Louisiana, and we see Matt Cable is packing up all the science stuff from the barn. He's got a couple guys there loading everything in a truck, and one of those guys says, "Another minute, Lieutenant, and we can close this place up." And Cable says, "The sooner the better. With the Hollands dead, there's no more reason to keep it open. And the quicker I can finish here, the quicker I can start tracking down the monster that killed." And then Cable is cut off by a car that pulls up, and there's a man inside of it, and this is like a super fancy car. I believe it's a Corvette, and it's red. It's got a T-top. It definitely stands out in the middle of the swamp in Louisiana. And apparently the guy driving it is just some guy Cable asked to find everything he could about the plane they saw Swamp Thing hanging from earlier. So the guy says, "I got the report you wanted on that crazy plane. Not much to give. The tracking station lost her somewhere over the Atlantic. So we contacted Interpol, and they've got their people working on it now. Anybody on this side of the Sphinx spots that spookjacker, and we'll know about it." And while this guy's talking, we also see that the dog is standing next to Cable hearing all of this. And that means that Mr. E, who has a transmitter in the dog's ear, is also hearing this. If you remember from the last issue, Mr. E was the head of the Conclave, some kind of secret organization. He's the one that sent Ferret and his goons to take out Alec and Linda and get their biorestorative formula. So we cut to him listening to his radio receiver, and he's petting his weird pet that's like some sort of ape creature, and he's speaking to it, saying, "So will we, my friend, thanks to the tiny transmitter we planted in your mongrel's head, for we too have a score to settle with this so-called monster." And then Mr. E gets all mad, and he begins to throw the radio receiver on the ground, and he says, "Two of our best men were lost to that Swamp Thing, and the Conclave does not take such losses lightly." Then we come back to Swamp Thing and Arcane is showing Swamp Thing into a room, and there's a giant vase in the middle of it that's gold, and it looks very archaic and occultish, and there's a bunch of his unmen waiting around it as well, and Arcane is saying, "There it is, Doctor. The little item that will make you normal once again by transferring the guise of the Swamp Thing to me. In the final evaluation, you see, all life is essence. By use of this mystic soul jar, I can remove the monstrous essence that imprisons Alec Holland and allow it to overwhelm my withered body instead. It sounds quite esoteric and complex, but I assure you, my friend, it works." And when Arcane and Swamp Thing get in front of this vase, Arcane removes the cover, and I should say that this thing is like 4 feet tall or something. It looks pretty big, and Arcane continues. "I will mutter the proper incantations, dear boy. All you need to do is want. Want to be rid of that moss-begrimed form as you have never wanted anything before. Want, my sad-eyed friend. Want, want, want." So Swamp Thing does just that, and we see some kind of red light emanating from the vessel, and the narration says, "And Alec Holland wants, with the fervor of a man haunted by the grimmest face of hell, his face, who now finds salvation beckoning with tired ancient eyes. The cracked crystal voice drones on and on. There comes impossible pain like the rending of a soul. And as the red light emits even more, it looks like Swamp Thing is definitely in pain. He's crying out, but then the red light disappears and he says, What happened? And the narration says, and a queasy Alec Holland watches the Swamp Thing clamp the soul jar tight. And we see Arcane is now in the Swamp Thing body, and he is putting the lid on the vase, and he says, "It's over, my boy. Take a look at yourself." And Alec looks down at his body, and he says, My arms, my hands, they're normal again. Dear God, I'm human. And it's funny because he's standing there naked in front of everybody, and so Arcane gets one of his unmen to give him some clothes, and Arcane tells him, "And so you will remain, providing the enchantment is not disturbed. Come take this robe, and I'll show you to more comfortable quarters." And we see as they leave, there is one of the unmen, the one that has a long kind of worm-like tail and also 4 arms. He looks pretty buff. He is encircling the vase and I guess protecting it. So as Arcane shows Alec to the room, Alec asks, "Your voice. It was so difficult for me to make that body speak. How do you manage it so easily?" And Arcane answers, "A benefit side effect of the enchantment, good doctor. But enough of that for now. You must be terribly tired, my boy. Rest a while, and then we will talk." So we cut to Alec resting in his room, and he's just sitting in one of the windows looking at the moon. And he's in a castle, so there's no glass in the windows. He's literally just sitting on an open windowsill in the moonlight, and he's looking up, and the narration says, "Moonlight, from time immemorial, it has charted the course of lovers and tides. But he who basks in its quicksilver glow this night has little interest in such celestial concerns." And we see Alec is thinking, human again. It seems too impossible to be true. Human again. To be able to sit like this without anger, without fear. I only wish Linda could be here to see it. Lord, how I wish Linda could be here. And these thoughts of Linda have made Alec kind of depressed, and he thinks to himself, I wonder if Arcane keeps anything around this place to drink. Right about now, I need one. So he leaves his room, and as he's walking down the stairs looking for some room that might have some alcohol, he's looking around at the weird design of this place, and he's thinking, what sort of madhouse is this place? It appears to have been put together in the throes of some architect's nightmare. So he finally reaches a door that he thinks Arcane is in, so Arcane can tell him where the alcohol is, and he thinks to himself, these must be his chambers. I can hear voices from in. Huh? And Alec is taken aback because the voice he hears is Arcane saying, gullible fool, played right into my hands. I'd have given anything for this body, anything, and Holland traded it for a paltry taste of fleeting humanity, an ill-considered bargain on his part indeed, for this malformed body means far more than immortality, my pets. It means power, power to exact the vengeance that has gnawed at my heart for years. Vengeance against the unthinking cretins who inhabit the village below, the self-centered snobs who shunned me in my youth, who scorned me in my work. In this indestructible body, I am able to do what I've longed to do. I can go down the mountain and destroy them all. And we get a nice shot of the little town right below the castle and the mountain. So Alec hears all of this crazy rant and he thinks to himself, this man is mad. I've given him the means to carry out his homicidal dream. Dear Lord, what have I done? I've sold out. That's what I've done. I've traded the lives of countless people for the sake of regaining my own, and there's nothing I can do about it. Nothing. But then Alec steels himself, not accepting this failure, and in anger he strikes the stone wall next to him, saying, no! There is a way to stop him, even if it costs me my soul. So he takes off running, and he runs all the way back to the room with the vase in it, and in his mind we can see he's remembering the words of Arcane saying, and so you will remain, providing the enchantment is not disturbed. So Alec reaches the room, and like I said, there is a giant four-armed, super muscly, worm-bodied unman protecting the vase, and Alec just charges it. And as he does, he says, pardon the intrusion, friend, but you're standing in my way. And I don't know what Alec thought he was going to do, but this muscly, four-armed unman just grabs him and begins to squeeze him. And Alec thinks, ugh, faster than it looks. It's breaking my back. The robe sash, my only hope. And he's talking about his own robe that he was wearing. It had a belt. So he takes that belt off and he begins to choke the monster. And the monster is still grabbing him, but apparently Alec has really, really strong pulling strength in his arms. And as he strangles this beefy unman, he thinks, I have to pray that the nylon cloth is stronger than this monster's synthetic throat. And it seems like his prayers were answered because the unman's body falls down limp, and Alec looks over at the Voss and thinks, the creature is finished, but there's one more thing I must attend to. So Alec goes over to the Voss and picks it up, and as he's holding it over his head, about to smash it on the ground, Swamp Thing Arcane runs in saying, Holland, don't! For God's sake, man, you'll ruin everything! And Alec says, yes, Arcane, for God's sake and for humanity as well! And then Alec throws the Voss onto the ground and it shatters. And we get this really cool transformation scene where we go from human Alec and Arcane Swamp Thing, and their bodies both transform as the panels descend down the page. And Arcane is yelling at Alec saying, you unmitigated idiot, do you know what you have done? And by the last panel, we see that Arcane is an old man again, and Alec is once again in the body of Swamp Thing. And to Arcane's question, Swamp Thing thinks, I know, Arcane, I know. So as Arcane is standing there super angry, the unmen begin to gather around him, and they look like they're about to attack as Arcane says, ruined, everything ruined, because of your stupid self-righteous stupidity. Tear at him, my pets, tear him apart. So like 50 unmen just attack Swamp Thing all at once, and Swamp Thing's fighting them, and as he does, we can see Arcane is creeping up some stairs, and Swamp Thing sees this and thinks, Arcane is escaping. These beasties are holding me back. And then he yells out, Arcane! And we see Arcane kind of turn around a little bit as he's walking up the stairs and just give a little smile as he glances back. And the narration says, the single word rolls harshly from the moss-encumbered lips, but it is much more than a word. It is an epithet, a curse, a promise of retribution not long in coming, and it echoes through the ancient battlements like the death knell of a dream. So Arcane thinks he's got the better of Swamp Thing, but it turns out that his unmen really suck at fighting. So Swamp Thing is able to bring them up the stairs as he's fighting them, and they're clinging all over him, but it seems that they're no match for his strength. And as Arcane gets to his door, he looks down the stairs and sees Swamp Thing coming up at him, and he says in fear, stop him, my pets, stop him! And Swamp Thing sees this and thinks, no chance, old man, I'm coming for you. So Arcane is able to get inside his room and close the heavy wooden door. And as Swamp Thing reaches it, it's no match for his strength either, and he's able to crash through it. And Arcane is actually in fear now, saying, no, keep away from me. Stay back. I gave you what you wanted. Made you human again. It's your own fault that you reverted back to the monster. Your own fault. Your own! And as he was saying these things, he was backing away from Swamp Thing, who was slowly approaching, and because his back was turned, he wasn't aware that he was in front of a window. So in his fear, he accidentally falls out of the window as he says his last line, your own fault! And the narration says, and the sound of the old man screaming is lost in the clouds below. And the second that Arcane fell out the window, the unmen apparently just stopped fighting Swamp Thing. So we see Swamp Thing standing in the middle of a bunch of just frozen unmen. And the narration says, their master gone, the unmen pause, uncertain of what to do. They mutter amongst themselves for a moment, and at last a decision is reached. For all of their existence, they have followed their master blindly, wherever he might lead, and there seems no good reason to change that situation now. So the unmen all gather together in front of the window and begin jumping out one by one, following Arcane down to his death. And as they finish and the last one jumps out the window, Swamp Thing looks down out of it and thinks, gone, all of them. They were loyal to the end. Then we see Swamp Thing walking down the stairs of the castle, and the narration says, shaking his mossy head sadly, the man-monster turns from the window and silently shambles away. His thoughts dwelling on an aged madman and his pathetic little flock, so we won't have to think of himself. Then we see Swamp Thing walk by a shadowed area. We see a Frankenstein-like monster stepping out from them, and this monster looks a lot different than the unmen. This one looks more like a human, whose body has just been sewn together from normal human body parts. So as this monster watches Swamp Thing walk away, the narration says, lost in contemplation, the Swamp Thing does not hear the ponderous form that rises up to follow. And with that, we are left with that cliffhanger, and we'll have to see who this monster is in issue 3. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And until next time, remember to stay swampy.